each community a greater sense of security and well-being. We help reduce the fear of crime in our neighborhoods. We improve crime reporting by community members, and we form a greater sense of community. We put the neighbor back into neighborhood by encouraging neighbors to know each other and get involved with each other. We bring law enforcement and the community together as a team working to reduce crime. Neighborhood watch groups take pride in their neighbors. We are the most successful crime prevention program ever offered. By working with your neighbors and the police department, you can help fight crime in our community the most effective way before it starts. And we'll be having applications out in the lobby afterwards of anybody living in Hayward wishing to join Hayward Neighborhood Alert.
Thank you, Elaine. Just a reminder to everybody, we are both organizations that are nonpartisan and nonprofit. We do not endorse any candidate. We simply provide an avenue for you to learn more about the candidates who have stepped up to serve. And we appreciate them making this sacrifice to run for public office. Notice there are only 3 people who have had the guts to do this out of our whole congressional district. So please give them the respect that they deserve, because I don't see anybody else up there. A few of the things that APAPA does for the community. First of all, APAPA stands for the Asian Pacific Islander American Public Affairs Association. Although we do exist to promote Asian Americans in leadership, we are also very inclusive of everybody. And you do not have to be Asian to be an APAPA member. And we invite you, after the candidate debate is over, to go outside into the lobby area and learn more about us. This evening, part of our volunteer team in putting this together consists of Diana Chung, who will be our moderator for the evening. Diana travels all over the world to teach business executives, including engineers and attorneys, to present themselves better in their communications. So she is best suited to be the moderator this evening, and we appreciate her for being here and serving. And with that, I will turn it over to our moderator, Diana Chung, to introduce the candidates. Thank you all for being here.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Diana Chung, and I'm tonight's moderator. It's my honor and pleasure to be here with you all tonight. So, tonight's candidate forum features the 3 candidates running for the 15th Congressional District. This year's election is of significant importance given the many issues on the minds of the American voters today. And we welcome Mr. Hugh Bussell, Ms. Ellen Corbett, and Mr. Eric Swalwell. We recognize the importance of an educated and informed constituency leading up to the June 3rd election, and we thank you very much for your attendance tonight. For this event, we have and will exercise every possible means to be fair and objective to each of our candidates. I ask that the audience treat our candidates with respect, and please hold your applause or expressions of support, doesn't matter how hard that is, until the end of this forum. And I thank you in advance for that. And now I would like to review this evening's format. The candidate seating arrangement is based on a random selection process that occurred earlier this evening. And each candidate will begin with an opening statement of 3 minutes. I will be asking a series of questions that each candidate will have an opportunity to respond. Candidates, you will have 3 minutes to respond to each question. Since we have 3 candidates, I respectfully request and trust that each of our candidates will keep the answers concise and to the point and keep it under the time limit. Towards the latter half of the evening, we will ask questions submitted by you, the audience members. 3x5 cards are distributed for your questions. And if you have questions that you would like to ask our candidates, please print. You can raise your hand, and those cards will be given to you. And please print clearly. And your questions must apply to all candidates. And I would like to identify our volunteer timer. So please raise your hand. Great, thank you so much. And she's going to be our volunteer timer, so candidates, please keep an eye on her. And she's going to give you a 30-second warning. Thank you very much. And also, when she would like you to respectfully ask you to stop your answer, she's going to show you that card. Thank you. With that, candidates, are we ready to begin? Great. And tonight we will have 4 questions in 4 major policy areas. And this will include questions on immigration, healthcare, tax reform, and national security. All right, before we get started, I will start with our opening statement. And in random order that was drawn by you, we'll start with Mr. Hugh Bussell. You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Association for this opportunity to be here in front of you and to answer your questions. It's a very exciting time to come out and try to let people know why I'm running and who I am and why I'm in this particular race. I've lived in this district for the last 25 years. I lived in both sides. In Hayward, I lived 17 years over near Val's Hamburgers, for those of you that know Hayward well, one of the favorite stomping grounds there. And for the last 11 years, we've been living out in Livermore, so I've lived on both sides of that. So I really understand a lot about how the district is put together. I actually grew up in Napa, when Napa was sort of a mixed agricultural area. I learned hard work by working out in the vineyards, picking grapes, doing various kinds of construction work, and also work in the wineries. So I worked very hard during that time. I went to school at Berkeley, graduated with a degree in physics, and then went into industry. I've also been a high school teacher. I taught at James Logan High School in Union City and up in Albany High. Now, the reason I'm running, one reason, is I'm a Republican. I don't think there's a lot of Republicans that have registered recently. I think the party feels a little bit demoralized. And I'm here to stand up and say, Republicans have some good ideas for California and some things that you should be interested in. So I'm here to kind of communicate some of those things. One thing, obviously, that's very important to me is education. Not only did I teach high school math and science, but I also ran a technology training group where I taught people how to do technology in the private sector, where I had to produce and do a good job, or people didn't invite you back and they didn't pay you to do that. So I have done both, and I understand the strictures that high school teachers have in trying to improve education. So it's very important that we have that, because that's the best way for people that are in lower economic level, poverty levels, getting out of that. There's many, many stories of people that have worked and been able to have a good life here in the United States because of our education, because of the opportunities. I don't think that we're delivering on that right now. Secondly, I'm looking at the economy. You know, we talked about a recession that was bad, but the recovery from this recession has been the slowest since the Great Depression. It's been a very slow recovery. We aren't getting the kinds of jobs that we would expect, and what is wrong with that? One of the reasons that we're seeing that slow recovery is the kinds of changes that are happening. Businesses don't understand what regulations are coming out. We have very large things that have changed healthcare delivery, and it's been a huge uncertainty for businesses. It makes it very difficult for them to plan and to move things ahead. So I'm just running because of those kinds of issues, our pocketbooks, our education. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bussell. Before we move on, I would like to remind the candidates to, because of our microphone system has been actually, it's a little bit on the lower end. I mean, the volume is a little bit on the lower end. So if you would like everybody to really hear you, please move forward and lean forward, and as much as you would almost kiss the microphone, then we can really hear you. Thank you. Next up, Ms. Ellen Corbett.
Thank you very much, and I'd also like to thank the Neighborhood Alert and APAPA for putting this event together, and for your work in the community to keep it a safe place, and APAPA's wonderful work to ensure that people are involved in the democratic process, and I've been a fan of your work for quite a while. I've had the honor and privilege of representing the East Bay and the Tri-City area for about 20 years. I think many of you know my history and my record. I currently serve as the state senator from the 10th District. I'm honored to be the majority leader chosen by my colleagues. And prior to that, I served in the State Assembly for 6 years. Prior to that, I was the mayor of San Leandro and also served on the City Council. I was the first woman actually elected as mayor of San Leandro. So I have a lot of great experience in state and local government. And I've gotten the opportunity to learn this district, to create relationships and partnerships, and to really live the lives of the individuals in this community. I grew up here in the East Bay. I had a lot of those great odd jobs working my way through college and through law school as well. And I learned a lot from my grandmother I grew up with, who lived in our home. She was an immigrant. She came to this country when she was about 16. She was looking for a better life for herself. She was escaping very intense poverty. And she taught me some very important lessons. One was, if you see something going wrong, you need to step in and do something about it yourself. So I come from an ethic in my family of public service. She also said that if you should always give back to this country that has given so much to us. So for that reason, I've been very interested in public service over the years. I've had the opportunity, too, to work very hard and fight for this community. And I run for this office because I have the strong support of this community, and I also want to continue to do the things I have always done. I've worked hard when local hospitals were at the brink of closure. I jumped in, organized my neighbors, and made sure these hospitals did not close. When we were about to lose an automobile manufacturing plant in Fremont, I worked very hard, along with my other elected colleagues, to try to keep that plant in town. And when we found out that they were leaving, we made sure that we did everything we could to find a replacement, and fortunately we did. My entire record as an elected official has been to create good jobs, preserve the environment, and try to continue making the lives of the people of the communities I represent better. That's another reason why I've been so involved and a great champion and advocate for our local schools, both K through 12, and also to ensure that our institutions of higher learning are always accessible and affordable for our young people. They are our future. I'd be honored to have your support and look forward to the questions this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Corbett. Next up is Mr. Eric Swalwell.
Thank you. I would also like to thank APAPA and Neighborhood Alert for hosting this forum tonight. And I am here tonight to humbly ask for your support for my reelection, so I may continue the work in the United States Congress that I have been doing for the past 500 days to work to grow and expand our middle class and make sure that we have economic opportunity and prosperity for every single person in this congressional district. And I am looking out for the middle class because that's where I came from. I grew up in this area, the oldest of 4 boys, to a father who retired as a police officer and my mom who still works today as a secretary. And I worked every single day from the time I was 10 years old up until now. I started as a newspaper delivery boy. I've worked as a server, a baseball umpire, a soccer referee. I've worked at the Stone Ridge Mall folding clothes, and I saw I was just as bad folding clothes there as I was at home, and moved on to a number of different odd jobs to put myself through college and law school. And I came back home to my community, and I came back to Hayward. And I worked as a prosecutor in the Alameda County District Attorney's Office for 7 years. And I served on my local city council. And my top priority today is to continue to create good paying jobs here. And it's not just because I come from the middle class, it's because I'm listening to the people who I serve. I have, over the past 500 days, flown home to and from Washington, D.C. back to the East Bay at approximately 325,000 miles. I've hosted 14 town halls, including one in Hayward. I have worked in the shoes of my constituents, doing a number of different jobs, odd jobs, just like I did as a kid, to learn what my constituents go through on a day-to-day basis. I've worked at a bakery here in Hayward. I've worked out at Eden Landing to restore our wetlands. And what I have seen talking to people across Hayward and across our district is that this economic downturn hurts. And they want a better chance at growing the economy so they can pay their bills, support their families, send their kids to school, and hopefully own a home in this area. And so what I have done is I've introduced pieces of legislation that help Hayward and our area directly. And I'll talk about those a little bit later tonight, but expanding economic opportunity, making sure women receive equal pay for equal work, passing comprehensive immigration reform, and also ensuring that we increase our minimum wage and expand unemployment insurance are the cornerstone of what I think can grow our local economy, and that's what I'll continue to do in Washington, D.C. So I am listening here at home. I hear you. I'm working for you in Washington, D.C., and I believe that this work is important, and I'm here to ask for your support so I can continue to do that work in Washington to move our area forward.
Thank you, Mr. Swalwell. Before we move on to tonight's questions, I would like to ask everybody for a favor. I know that you all want to give our best respect to the candidates, so please take a look at your phone and see if it's silent. I'll give you 5 seconds for that. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, so since we all have just paid taxes, so that's a pretty fresh topic on our mind right now. So we're going to go straight to that first. So there has been a lot of talk about the middle class being squeezed. Many Americans work 2 or sometimes even 3 jobs to make ends meet. Feed and house their families, send their children to college, or even work towards a higher education for themselves in order to have a better future. So our question to the candidates is, if the individuals that are described above are in a higher income bracket due to the sacrifices they make and the hard work that they do, what do you feel, what do you think about them being taxed at a higher income bracket? And Ms. Corbett, you are the first to answer that question. Thank you.
Well, I think the very most important part of setting policy for taxes and revenue is to ensure that people understand that their tax dollars that they've worked very hard to provide are fair and that they are used for purposes that are worthwhile. I'll give you an example. In the election just last year, Proposition 30 was passed, and that was a measure that increased the tax rate on people of higher income. It was placed on the ballot because we wanted to have an opportunity to see if the voters would support such a measure, and this measure, of course, provides funding for our local schools, K through 12. And I can tell you, in this year's budget, we've had the opportunity to take a look at increasing the revenue that will be made available to our K through 12 schools. And people are very supportive of this. It'll make a great difference for our young people, and it will make a great difference here in Hayward, especially, a school district that will receive increased revenue as a result of it. So the very first thing is, if anybody is asked to pay higher taxes, we as elected officials must make sure that we are not wasting those dollars, and we are respecting the hard work that made that happen. So I think that's the most important thing, fairness in a tax system. Obviously, nobody really likes to pay taxes. We all just filed our taxes. But the very most important thing is to make sure that the system is fair and that the taxpayers can trust that we're doing the right thing. And before we'd ever ask anybody to raise taxes, we must absolutely make sure that we cut any waste, fraud, or abuse. And I can tell you, in the last few years in the state legislature, we have made billions of dollars of cuts to put the state back on the right track so that we have the opportunity to provide the services that people need, but also to even out our revenue situation so that in the next few years, if we do have a recession, we now set some money aside so there's not ups and downs. So whenever we take a look at our taxation system, it should be fair, and we should allow the people to understand that we are respecting the hard work that they do.
Ms. Corbett, I would like to follow up with your answer. What do you propose specifically that we do? And this is for all the candidates.
With taxes?
Yes.
In general, to always make sure that they are fair, that we shouldn't set up a situation where people are paying taxes that creates a scenario where they're not able to afford their housing costs. We should make sure that, again, like I said, before we ask anybody to increase their taxes, that we, as elected officials, cut out any tax abuse or fraud or waste.
Thank you, Ms. Corbett. Mr. Swalwell?
The greatest crisis in our country right now is the widening gap between the rich and our middle class. I don't know about anyone else here, but when I talk to people across this area, I see men and women who are working hard, but they're getting paid less or getting paid the same. Wages right now are staying flat for middle class workers. But the top 1%, they keep getting wealthier and wealthier. Never before since the 1960s have corporate revenues been higher, and never before since the 1960s has disposable income for middle-class Americans been lower. So addressing and reducing income inequality should be the top priority of our income tax system. And I have voted in the Congress twice now against the Paul Ryan Republican budget, which would increase costs for seniors and their health costs, and it would decrease taxes for millionaires. And I think that's just flat wrong, and I think that hardworking Americans should not pay an effective tax rate that is higher than millionaires and billionaires. And no billionaire should pay a tax rate that is lower than his or her secretary. And so having a tax code that reflects that, I think, has to be one of our top priorities. When it comes to the tax code today, if this was a game of poker, the wealthy and the rich would be dealt a pair of aces, and the middle class would be dealt a pair of twos. That's how upside down our tax code is today. So I will continue to stand up in the Congress for a tax code that grows our middle class. And I've written a tax bill that will incentivize Make It in America jobs, which for Hayward, we could really use that along Mission Boulevard or B Street. It tells every small business owner, if you come into Hayward or Union City or Fremont or any area that's economically depressed and you create jobs, you can have a tax deferral. So I'd rather reward companies and individuals who want to create jobs here, not give incentives to take jobs overseas, or incentives that would have millionaires and billionaires paying a lower effective tax rate than our middle class.
Thank you, Mr. Swalwell. Next up, Mr. Bussell.
Well, thank you. So I was listening to those answers, and I was saying to myself, I don't think they directly answered those questions. And I think part of the reason is that Mr. Swalwell and Ms. Corbett are both career politicians. This is what they've been doing most of their lives, and one of the things that they're very excited about being is a politician. I have to admit, I'm not a politician. I'm a regular person who has gone out, worked, raised a family, tried to understand how the world works, tried to study about economics, tried to understand these things. So questions about tax policy, do I think it's fair that different people pay different amounts if they do the same work? If they work hard and they get an extra job, they work at night? One example I gave to someone was, I have a daughter in college right now. I had a son who went through, and I have extra cost. I have a hard job that I work at during the day with software. Imagine I decided to go and get a job at 7-Eleven just to add some more money to the family. Another person does the same thing. He gets a job where he's working 4 hours a night at 7-Eleven. We both do the same work, we both earn the same pay, but if I make more money than he does, and I'm in a different tax bracket, I get more of that taken away. I have to send more of that off. So there's actually a disincentive for me to go out and work and do anything extra. So I think to your question, in some sense, it's really unfair to do that. That different people get taxed at a higher rate because they earn more. One of the challenges is it's always easy to tax somebody else. Oh, that millionaire over there, let's tax them. Oh, you know that guy down the street, he's a lawyer, he makes more than I do. We should tax him more. I think we mostly understand that it's fair if we each pay the same percent, the same fraction of our income to everyone. Now, maybe one thing that could happen is we should exclude a certain amount of income so everyone isn't taxed for a basic amount. You know, the stuff you have to do to pay for your apartment and to pay for food and gas and clothing and transportation. And then another rate that we all pay after you get to that. That's just one idea. It's very difficult to implement because of all the carve-outs and special things that you do for your special pet projects that you have. But everyone would understand that, and then we could fight over what the rate should be, but everybody pays it, and we could fight over where the excluded income should be. That would be a reasonable way that we could have an actual discussion about this, rather than a tax code that goes on and on for tens of thousands of pages. It's very difficult to understand. Carves out special exemptions for special industries, special folks get special tax deals. So that's what I would do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bassel. Candidates, I really appreciate it when you answer the question specifically and in terms of what you would propose. Appreciate that. So our next topic area will be national security and foreign relations. A lot of money, as you all know, a lot of money is sent to aid other countries that we believe that are in need. And while here in the United States, many Americans feel that our government is neglecting its own people. So our question to you is, how do you believe our armed forces should be serving internationally? And the first candidate to answer this question will be Eric Swalwell.
I serve on the Committee on Homeland Security, and I still believe that one of our top responsibilities as elected officials is to make sure that our homeland is protected. As far as economic aid goes, that is less than 1% of our overall budget, and I believe firmly and deeply that that money is money that is very, very well spent. It goes to some of the poorest countries in the world to give them opportunities at peace, democracy, and prosperity, and that ensures, hopefully, and we have to make sure there are safeguards against any waste or corruption that could exist, but it ensures that we don't have to have conflicts, or they don't have regional conflicts that turn into threats to our own national security. But as far as our armed services, this responsibility of the U.S. government is one that I take very, very seriously. We should never send the young men and women in our armed services to any part of the world to protect our country and our freedoms unless it is the absolute last resort. If all other areas of solving a conflict have been exhausted, then that should be what's on the table. Too often, though, over the last 15 years, that has been the first resort. And so I will continue to support diplomacy, international relations. I was against going into Syria back in September because I did not feel that the president had exhausted diplomacy. It wasn't easy to stand up against my own president, but I did believe that using the United Nations was important. And today we see that Syria, 90% of its chemical weapons have been taken away because diplomacy worked in that case. Too many young men and women, 1 million, have gone to Afghanistan and Iraq. 50,000 have been wounded, and we see every single day what they are going through because I think were irresponsible decisions to send them there. And now we must make sure we take care of them when they come home and stand up for them when they are home. But the best thing we can do is make sure that we responsibly act with diplomacy before we send them to any theater of war across the globe.
Thank you, Mr. Swalwell. Mr. Bassel.
Well, I find that I'm in 100% agreement with Eric Swalwell that sending troops someplace else should be the last resort. Obviously, diplomacy is the first tool. We have to have relationships with our partners, our allies, and we have to have relationships with our competitors, with our perhaps enemies at one time or who will be enemies later. One of the things that's very important, though, in all of our foreign policy is that we say something and we follow through with it. That we don't just say, okay, here's a red line that you can't cross, and then if they cross it, we say, okay, well, we're not going to do that, we'll do something else. We lose a lot of credibility. It's better not to comment on a situation and not get involved in it than it is to make an ultimatum and then not carry it through. Because then, who will believe us when we need to actually take action? And I think what happens is that people around the world, there are many bad actors that are emboldened when the United States is weak. I'm not saying that we should have troops everywhere, large amounts of troops. We have to have enough that their freedom of the seas is assured, freedom of the air is assured, that people and goods can move from one place to another, that we can trade. That's one of the best ways that we can have good neighbors and peaceful relations if we have that going on. But I think what's been demonstrated in the last few years is especially we have been fairly weak in some of those areas and people have been emboldened to move on. One of the other things that we have to think about is how we deal with issues like nuclear proliferation. Our foreign policy has not been very good at keeping other countries from developing nuclear weapons. We've actually given bad messages to people. As an example, look at Libya. They gave up their nuclear weapons program because they were a little bit worried about the United States. They gave up their nuclear weapons program and their leader is out. He's dead now. The leaders of Ukraine had many nuclear warheads there at the end of the Cold War. We agreed to help protect them. They gave up their nuclear weapons. Now they're faced with invasion. What kind of message does that send? In Iraq even, there was a nuclear program that was stopped, and that person, Saddam Hussein, is no longer in power. So we have to think very carefully about what our interests are, what messages we send, and if we say something, we follow up with it, rather than just stepping back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bussell. Ms. Corbett.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this question. It's a great question. I have so many different ways I could go with this. I'm someone who grew up during the Vietnam era. I was a young child, and some of you remember this. You go home at night, and before you sat down with the family for dinner, you were watching the news, and you were watching terrible, terrible battles where people were losing their lives, and napalm, and children who were impacted, and families who were torn apart as a result of war. Obviously, the United States is the beacon of democracy, and we have always been known to step in and fight for freedom on behalf of others who might be experiencing the terrible atrocities of war. And we should also we should always continue that role in the world. But I think it's extremely important that we as citizens always speak up to our elected officials and let them know that peace is the way to go whenever possible. Diplomacy is an extremely important part of our role in the world as well. And I believe that the aid programs are extremely important. We have the opportunity to have others in other countries understand that we do respect them, we care for them, we believe in their well-being. But I too am very concerned about sending people off to war when it's not necessary. We remember the weapons of mass destruction, which never were found. We know what happened in Syria. Many people were so torn. I was actually out doing a farmer's market about the time that the concerns about Syria were unfolding, and so many people came up to my table. They all wanted to talk about that, even though I was a state senator. And people were saying, well, what are we going to do? The people in Syria are in harm's way, but at the same time, we want to make sure we don't send off our young men and women to be killed if indeed we don't want to put them in harm's way either. So I think our role will always be, and should always be, that we are the fighters for freedom around the world. But we must make sure that we also create a world where people can live in peace, where we do not have to send our young men and women off to be killed, but instead forge relationships with people around the world of respect.
Thank you, Ms. Corbett.
Welcome.
Okay, we have discussed foreign policy, national security. Now we're going to come back to the border of the United States. So here's a question about immigration. I would like to ask the candidates, for those illegal immigrants that are already in our country, what's your opinion on giving them a pathway to citizenship? And we start with Mr. Hugh Bussell. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the mics is kind of hot, so we're getting all that feedback. Something needs to be turned down a little. So there's a lot of discussion about comprehensive immigration reform, path to citizenship, illegal aliens, all these things. There's a lot of very strongly held beliefs on a lot of different sides of that. On the one hand, you have to agree that it doesn't seem fair that people have come here without going through the process and following our laws. And they're here illegally. Why should someone who's here illegally have a path to citizenship? On the other side of this argument, people will often say, well, look, these people are here to work, they have families, they're law-abiding citizens, except for coming across the border. So I know a lot of them feel attacked when we talk about this issue, like, oh, we hate you folks because you're here. No, we're glad that people are here and that they're contributing to society, but the fact of the matter is they did come through illegally. So we do need to have some kind of comprehensive immigration reform. We've talked about this at other kinds of forums. One of the things that we need to have is control over who's coming into the country. So we need to have either a fence or some other way of preventing more people coming in. Once we have that and people in the country are convinced that we've actually gotten control of the border and more people aren't coming in, then it's time to address those other issues. Now, people have talked about amnesty. I don't think that we're in favor of amnesty. We tried an amnesty in 1986, and that just attracted more people. We need to have some way of saying to someone who's here illegally, come out of the shadows, pay fines, have a background check, be part of the system, but come in after anyone who has already applied legally, who's here for that. And at that time, we can evaluate it. Now, there's a lot of different ideas for that. We have to work on those. But in broad strokes, that's kind of my idea about that. Now, people always talk about being a nation of immigrants. My great-grandparents came over from Ireland and Sweden at the time. My wife's great-grandparents came over from China. So people come from lots of different places, and we've all contributed lots of ways. The folks that really get the short shrift are those that have gone through the crazy laws and the crazy hoops that we make people jump through to come through as immigrants, to come here to work. So our immigration system definitely needs a lot of work. It's broken. It has to be fixed so that people who are reasonable, people that want to work, people that want to be part of the American dream can come here. But we also, as the people that are here, have a right to kind of limit that, kind of ask people to follow our laws and our rules. So I'm willing to work with anyone on any side of the aisle to improve that system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bussell. Ms. Corbett.
Do you mind repeating the question? I want to make sure I hear the whole thing.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking.
After my long-winded answer.
So for the illegal immigrants that are already in our country, what's your opinion on giving them a pathway to citizenship?
Well, I absolutely support a pathway to citizenship, and I also have to agree that our immigration system is broken. We have terrible backlogs. We don't take advantage of technologies that would allow for the system to work better, to move people through the process who are interested in applying and who have been waiting for many, many years to become citizens. But I do believe that people who have been in this country for a certain length of time should have an opportunity to go through a system as well. I think the most important thing we must do is be fair and ensure that those who have applied also have their cases moving forward and quickly. As a state senator, immigration is not within the realm of what we do, but we hear from people all the time where family members are interested in being reunited. They want to come to this country to be reunited with their family, and they've been waiting for years and years. So we have to avail ourselves of the latest technology. We have to build a system that allows people to move through the process so that they can achieve their dream of becoming American citizens. People would not come here illegally unless they were leaving poverty or oppression or just wanted to have a better lives for their family. And we still are such an amazing country that so many people want to come here and become citizens. I don't think anybody just wants to be not a citizen. I think they'd like to be a citizen. So it's extremely important we set up a system that allows people to reunite with their families. We allow for a humanitarian component for those who are leaving oppression in countries back home. And we create a system where the backlog can be cleared, and we also have an opportunity for people who have been here, who have been working, living with their families, and definitely making a difference in their communities, have an opportunity to achieve their American dream and become citizens as well.
Thank you, Ms. Corbett. Mr. Swalwell.
I have seen firsthand as a prosecutor and a congressman the results of a broken immigration system. As a prosecutor, too often I worked with victims of domestic violence or robbery, and because these individuals were undocumented, oftentimes I saw them removed from their families before I could bring them to court and have justice brought to their perpetrator, swept up in raids and separated from their children and their husbands or wives. As a congressman, our office has worked with a number of individuals, and first, with all due respect, I don't use the phrase illegal. They may be undocumented, but I don't see them as illegal. I think that's a phrase that demonizes why they are here. They are aspiring to be Americans. And I think of the people who our office has worked with. I think of the 9-year-old boy who was separated from his mother because she was here undocumented, but she brought him here because she wanted a better life for him. I think of the carpenter from Hayward who's separated from his wife today, and we're trying to help to reunite them, who has his wife here because he wants to start a family with her and for their family to realize the American dream. I think of an individual who is sitting in the audience tonight, who has been working in our country and wants to be a part of our culture and contribute to our economy, but is waiting and waiting and waiting because we have a broken immigration system. So here's what I've done in Congress. I have supported passing comprehensive immigration reform to make sure that we have an earned roadmap to citizenship for the people who want to come here and aspire to be a part of this American dream. I have also, each and every day with my staff, assisted scores and scores of aspiring Americans, immigrants who through a variety of different means are trying to be a part of our country. And I've also fasted in solidarity for 24 hours with families who were fasting for those families who have been taken away out of our country and separated. We must act on this, and I will not rest. I will not relent. I will continue to work with my staff for these aspiring Americans, not illegal immigrants, to make sure that they can be a part of the fabric of our community and contribute to our economy.
Thank you, Mr. Swalwell. I'd like to ask the candidates right now, it's your choice. Would you like an opportunity, a 1-minute rebuttal opportunity to the immigration law? No? Okay, we'll move on. Now, healthcare is it's absolutely one of the most important issues on our minds. Many Americans, even those who have supported the ACA, have experienced a rise in their healthcare costs. So, candidates, do you support the Affordable Care Act? If not, so you start your answer with yes or no. If not, what do you believe is the solution to the rising costs? And we'll start with Ms. Corbett.
Well, I in the past have supported a single payer system, which I think would create a system that would allow people the coverage that they need, and really a little bit better maybe than what the Affordable Care Act offers, and have been the co-author of that legislation year after year in the California legislature. But I absolutely do support the Affordable Care Act. So many people I have encountered have had to struggle with getting health care that is affordable and accessible. People who have pre-existing conditions. One of the things my office does has helped hundreds and hundreds of people to try to access some sort of health care, whether it's through a private system or through state-supported health care. And I can't begin to tell you the many stories we have heard from individuals, people suffering from cancer, people with terrible debilitating diseases, and all they wanted to do is have the opportunity to have a doctor take care of them. So I absolutely support a system that allows for people with pre-existing conditions to be covered. And I also absolutely support the Affordable Care Act because in many cases, being a woman was a pre-existing condition with many types of insurance. So the Affordable Care Act provides insurance for all. It also provides a system where families can keep their children on their policies until they're 26. I know that's very important to many families. But I do have some concerns. I work very closely with our local hospitals and our local clinics, and I know there's people in the audience who do too. And one of the things that we found is that the copay is very high in many situations for people who have signed up for the Affordable Care Act. And the premium is also very high for people in small business. So my top priority with regard to the Affordable Care Act and health care, if I'm lucky enough to become the next member of Congress, and also in the state legislature under the Covered California program, which we instituted, first state in the nation to start the Affordable Care Act, is to do whatever we can to take a look at these premiums. People are actually showing up in our emergency rooms even though they're covered by the Affordable Care Act because they cannot afford the copay. Some of our local clinics are having difficulty because people are not coming to the clinics and using this new resource they have because it's too expensive. And it's also impacting our local hospitals because of the number of people who are coming to the emergency room and not using their new coverage. So it is a serious situation. It's obviously it's a great program. I support it, but there are some adjustments that absolutely need to be made so that we are not hurting our small businesses and ensuring that they do have the accessible coverage that the Affordable Care Act was all about. It is called the Affordable Care Act. And also to make sure that individuals have the ability to use this new health care and not create a scenario that we were trying to, we were trying to guard against when this measure was passed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Swalwell?
Yes, I do support the Affordable Care Act, and I have also voted against every single effort to repeal or undermine the Affordable Care Act that we have seen in the Congress. And I voted against the efforts to repeal or undermine the Affordable Care Act because I have talked to too many people who are benefiting from it. Talked to a woman who has breast cancer in Castro Valley, and she told me that before the Affordable Care Act, she could never afford health insurance coverage. But because of the Affordable Care Act, for the first time since having breast cancer, she now can afford health insurance coverage. But this isn't just something that is benefiting individuals. Talked to a small business owner in San Ramon who told me that his 80-employee business, for the first time in 10 years, saw their premiums go down. So this is helping people. But we owe it to all of the patients in our district and across the country to make sure that it remains affordable, accessible, and the highest quality. So I do remain open to reasonable, sensible efforts to make it better and work for more people. But I will not ever vote to repeal it and take us back to where we were. Because where we were was a system where health care costs were rising 7 to 10% every year, beyond every other expense we had in our lives. Where we were was women were being denied coverage because being a woman was considered a pre-existing condition. And where we were, children were being taken off their parents' plan. Today, now they can stay all the way up to the age of 26. But we're also seeing that the Affordable Care Act can help create jobs for our local economy. Create new jobs in health information technology, biotech jobs, with now more people having the ability to purchase the care to address their chronic illnesses. We can use the Affordable Care Act to really address, on the preventive side, by giving people more preventive care, the costs that are driving our health care costs to continue to go up. So I think through science and technology, and I serve on the Science and Technology Committee, we can continue to strive to use innovation combined with the access that the Affordable Care Act provides to actually reduce how much money we spend on health care each year, whether it's Medicare or Medicaid. So the Affordable Care Act, I will support, I will not repeal, and I will find every way possible to make sure that it provides more opportunities for jobs for the people in our area.
Thank you, Mr. Swalwell. Mr. Russell.
The Affordable Care Act had a lot of promises associated with it. And I understand how important health care is. My sister eventually succumbed to a brain tumor. She was in and out of hospitals for 10 years. And there was a lot of tension in my home as I thought about, my parents worrying about whether she was covered and whether my dad had his job and whether his coverage would continue. So I do understand what that's all about. Now, my mom and my sister are both nurses. I've seen healthcare from that perspective. And then finally, my mother-in-law and father-in-law, they lived with us the last couple of years of their life, sort of at the end of lifetime. And we needed a lot of help to take care of them. But fortunately, their healthcare was taken care of. So we didn't have to worry about that burden. So I know how scary it is to be out there without healthcare. I'm not enthusiastic with how the Affordable Care Act was sold to us. You can keep your doctor if you like him. You can keep your plan if you like him. Well, it turns out you can't. We were also promised that the average bill for a family would go down $2,500 a year. And Senator Corbett has just said that people are finding it's more expensive. It's too expensive for them to use in many cases. Now, Mr. Swalwell mentioned that some people actually have benefited from this, and it's true. There are some winners and some losers in that. So there's great things in that plan. I do like the idea of keeping your kids on until 25, although I hardly characterize a 24-year-old or a 25-year-old as a kid, but okay. I also like the idea that you can't be excluded for pre-existing conditions. That's a huge thing, and we can change that. So I would like to keep that. There are ways to do that. There are ways to have high-risk pools that handle that. Another way that we can make better choices about that is, instead of the federal government, people in Washington, D.C., bureaucrats deciding what should be on a health care plan, we should allow more competition for that, because they say you have to cover all these things and not these things. Maybe all you really worry about is some kind of catastrophic coverage. You can't get that anymore. You're mandated to cover many, many, many different kinds of things. Now, if you'd like to be covered for that, there should be a nationwide kind of plan to do that. I mean, the federal employee health plan does that. A lot of different insurance companies come and they bid for the federal workers to be part of that. If we had a national market for that, instead of being divided up by state lines, we would actually get better results, better health care, and more competition. So there's things I like, and I'd be happy to work with anyone on that, but we do need to replace some of the bad parts about that Affordable Care Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bussell. We have a few minutes before we start the closing statement. So what we're going to do now is go into the audience questions. So we have a couple questions from the audience, and they're not going to be 3-minute answers anymore. I'm going to ask the first question. That's a 30-second answer. All right,
Okay.
you ready for this?
We'll try.
Will you support a flat tax for the Social Security so that the high earners earn the same percentage as the low-income earners? And Mr. Swalwell.
I will support raising the cap on Social Security earnings, not a flat tax. Right now, the cap is at $113,000. I think wealthier individuals need to pay more, and it's in their interest that we have retirement security for our seniors. And I have supported that in legislation in the Congress, but I believe that, and studies have shown that we can extend Social Security solvency beyond 2033, actually into 2065, if we raise the cap on Social Security earnings. So it's time to raise the cap, have wealthier individuals pay more, and we will all see better retirement
Thank you, Mr.
security.
Swalwell. And Mr. Bussell, 30 seconds.
Did you say 2023? Oh man, that's pretty close. It's hard to answer that question in such a short time, but...
Time's up. Oh, sorry. Sorry.
But that's fine. I do support flat taxes. I support an exclusion of people's incomes so that we're not taxing people that are poor, that aren't making very much. I don't know exactly where that number should be, but the percent that we all pay should be about the same. We can fight about that. We can argue about that. We can move back and forth on that. That's the kind of discussion I'd like to have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bussell. Ms. Corbett.
I believe we should raise the cap on Social Security as well. Those dollars are very much needed by the individuals that are on fixed incomes. And I know there was an effort just last year to change the formulation to a chain CPI. I was very much against that. And if it had been my decision, I would have never wavered. I would have never thought, oh, maybe that's a good idea. I absolutely support ensuring that people who have worked hard and who have earned it have the opportunity to live a respectful life and have Social Security that helps pay for their living.
Thank you, Ms. Corbett. We're going to go to the next question. And for this question, you have 1 minute to answer, so you can breathe.
1 minute. Okay.
Here's the question. Veteran Affairs is a mess. What have you done or will do to support our veterans and get them the benefits that they need? Mr. Bussell, you go first.
Yeah, it's an embarrassment when people that have served this country aren't treated properly. And I don't, in some ways it's hard for us to really understand why our government can't do a better job with that. And maybe it's just philosophically, it's difficult for large organizations to execute on anything. Maybe if we focus more on taking care of those, making those a #1 priority, rather than some of the other programs that we have, some of the other waste and abuse and duplicate programs and advertising that we do to advertise this thing or that thing. So we need to have the right kind of oversight for the folks that do that. And the challenge is there's many, many people that are dedicated and they love their job and they really take care of our veterans, but they get tarnished by this bad oversight and these bad conditions that occur. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bussell. Ms. Corbett.
I agree. Our veteran services are in a bit of a mess. We hear from people every single day. Again, veteran services are federal services, but my office makes a point of helping every single veteran that contacts our office because they don't always get attention when they contact Veterans Affairs. In the state, we did something in our last year's budget that we've never done before. State money was actually budgeted to help clear the backlog at Veterans Administration. We also put another $3 million was budgeted for that. Another $3 million for our county veteran service officers. Just A few weeks ago, we celebrated with a veteran who received $100,000 in back veterans pay, and another that we just heard from yesterday who's receiving his long-awaited Veterans Affairs. I have had conversations with the local director, and I will do whatever I can to make sure these people who have served our country get the respect and the resources they need to live in dignity.
Thank you, Ms. Corbett. Mr. Swalwell.
I have worked since being elected to Congress to stand up for those who have served us by visiting the young men and women who are serving on the battlefield. I went to Afghanistan and other parts of the Middle East. I have visited them at Walter Reed and have talked to them as they were receiving care for their wounds. I have welcomed them home at the different homecomings. And the hardest part of this job was when a young Hayward soldier, James Grissom, was killed in Afghanistan on March 21st of last year, and I spoke at his funeral and talked to his family. And I decided at that point that the best way to honor James, the best way to honor him, was to take care of the people who he served with who are still alive today. And we have a VA system that's not doing that. It's backlogged beyond 350 days, so you don't get a response from the VA for your claim for at least 350 days in our area, and that is just wrong. And so I have called for hiring a new director as soon as possible. Our office is stepping up where the VA has not been able to, and we have returned over $750,000 to veterans for their claims. So we must continue to be vigilant for our veterans because they stood up for us.
Thank you, Mr. Swalwell. Now it's your time to have your closing statement. And I think it's all of our interest to really hear some specifics in your closing statements. I think that's just in general what we desire from politicians. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to do that. You have 3 minutes to do your closing statements. And I ask that you include at least 2 specific things that you are going to do. Specific things that you're going to do if you were elected. And we're going to start with Mr. Swalwell.
I want to thank APAPA and Neighborhood Alert again for hosting this, and also my fellow candidates and each and every one of you for attending tonight. I am here tonight because I am asking that you send me back to Congress to continue a job that I love, because each and every day I get to go to work for you. I get to stand up for our middle class where I came from. And I appreciate how hard they work, but I think they're working too hard for too little. And so what I seek to do in Congress is continue to make my top priority growing our local economy, expanding opportunity. I have done that by introducing the Main Street Revival Act, which will give a tax deferral to any business that comes to an economically depressed area. I have also done that by introducing the Restarting Local Communities Act. Hayward, like Union City and Livermore and San Ramon and Fremont, lost millions of dollars in redevelopment money when the state legislature voted to take that money away. Those projects are sidelined today. Those projects would have created affordable housing for people who can't afford to live here in the Bay Area. They would have created new local jobs. I have also been a loud voice in the Congress for increasing our minimum wage to $10.10 and expanding unemployment insurance. I also want to make sure we expand opportunity for all. When I go to schools across this district, and many schools in Hayward, I visited a John Muir Head Start school, and I talked to these young students. And I think the deck is stacked against them. They've been dealt a pair of 2s. And all they're asking for, all their families are asking for, is for them to have an equal opportunity. So that means not cutting Head Start, it means expanding Head Start. It means having pre-K education so they have a chance at that American dream. It means passing comprehensive immigration reform so the carpenter and the young boy and the immigrant who came here to realize a better dream for their family have a roadmap to citizenship. It means that no woman in our country should be paid less to do the same job as a man. It means she should receive equal pay for equal work. That's what I have stood up for in the Congress. It means our veterans who have gone across oceans, thousands of miles, to put their lives on the lines for us, should have us standing up for them with something more than just thank you for your service, but what can we do to help you now that you're at home? And my office has done that, returning, as I said, $750,000 and counting to our veterans, giving them more opportunities here at home. There is so much more to do. It's an honor to serve you in the Congress. It's an honor to be your voice. But I'm asking you today to send me back there so I can be louder, work harder, and move our area forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Swalwell. Just to remind everybody, could you briefly state what are the 2 things you are going to do to continue serving us?
Would you like me to keep going? I've got a lot I'd like to do. Yeah, so not just the Main Street Revival Act that I've already introduced or the redevelopment bill. I want to make sure that we have in our area, we are seeing, because of income inequality, we are seeing that the middle class is shrinking. So in addition to those 2 bills, passing and increasing the minimum wage. In addition to those 2 bills, expanding unemployment insurance. So I think
Thank you.
Addressing income inequality requires that and the bills I've already worked on.
Thank you. And next up, Mr. Bussell.
Well, specifically, I will fly more miles than Eric has done. So that's one specific plan. All kidding aside, and we do kid each other back and forth a bit. But I want to ask you a couple of things. Here we have 2 career politicians. We have 2 lawyers. I have a degree in physics. This man has a JD, and he's on the Science and Technology Committee. I think I could fill that seat quite easily and do a better job in terms of understanding and working with technology. Specific things we can do, we always talk about how things get wasted in Washington, D.C. We just talked about how the VA does a really bad job in some areas, and the healthcare outcome is not good. I would suggest that Senator Corbett here, if she has a single-payer tax, single-payer healthcare system, we'll find a lot of those same kind of problems there because you're stuck with the single-payer bringing up that particular thing. What I bring is things from industry, understanding on how you have to actually accomplish things and do goals, make things happen, or your company goes out of business, or you lose your job. A number of things that have been done in business are like Lean Six Sigma, to go out and to improve the process there. So I would, as a specific thing I would do, I would encourage and require and make it as easy as possible for all of these federal government agencies to actually follow some of the best practices that we found in business to get better at what we do, to deliver better services to our customers, to the voters and the taxpayers, and to reduce redundancy and waste. You've all heard the stories about federal agencies. It's the end of their financial year, and they have money they haven't spent yet. So they run out and they spend it. There's a disincentive for them to use their resources wisely. The incentive is for them to spend the same amount, or they'll get less at the next appropriations. So we need to change that dynamic so that we don't encourage that kind of behavior. We have to have a better run government. I also, specifically, I'm not against raising the Social Security limit. However, it seems odd that you would raise the Social Security income limit, but by the same token, you would reduce the amount paid to the Social Security fund by eliminating payroll taxes, as you have in some of your the legislation that you've passed. You, Mr. Swalwell, have said, oh, we'll allow people not to have to pay payroll taxes for a year. That actually reduces the money that was supposed to go for Social Security, because that payroll tax is essentially that money as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bussell. Ms. Corbett.
So I'm going to start with the things that I will do if I go to Congress. First of all, I will always protect Medicare. I will not play footsie with an idea of cutting the system. I will always protect your privacy. I will not vote for a bill that will allow for private information to be handed over without a warrant. And I will continue to do what I've done for the last several years, and that's work to grow this local economy. I chair a committee in the Senate called the Committee on Emerging Technologies. I have spent a lot of time in the 20 years I have represented this district trying to determine what's the best way to grow the jobs. We are very lucky. We live in a part of the world where innovation is extremely important, and we have great labs and institutions of higher learning where we come up with amazing ideas that drive our economy. In fact, even during this recession, exports were growing from the state of California because of our green energy technologies developed in this area, commercialized in this area, and in some cases manufactured in this area, providing excellent jobs. I also know, because of the 20 years I have represented this area, there's a dichotomy. That innovation and that entrepreneurship doesn't just happen. It happens because we allow people the opportunity to be creative, and we support the most important infrastructure, which is our K through 12 and our colleges and universities. I understand if we are going to continue to grow our local economy and our innovation economy in California and in the world, we have to support that. I also am so honored that people have asked me to run. This is a challenge, running against, being the challenger in this race. But I can tell you, people have come to me and said, Ellen, we know your record. We know what you stand for. When you say something to us, you can take it to the bank. I'm also running because I'm hugely concerned about the future of this country, and I am concerned that people are starting to not be involved in the process because they don't trust or believe in their elected officials. One of the most terrible things that would ever happen in the United States is that people would no longer participate because they didn't believe that their elected officials were going to D.C. to do their business, to make sure that they are supporting them. My entire life as a public servant has been about that. I have a very unique perspective. I'm a mom. I'm a single mom. My son's in college. I have worked hard to ensure that he has the best. It has not always been easy. And I know the struggles of the community because I have been in your homes. I have been in your neighborhoods. I have been with you during this recession. And I stayed in the Senate instead of running earlier because I believed I could make a difference in the state of California. And we did. California is back on track. And I have no regrets that I stayed there to be part of that. I would be honored to have all of your support. You know I will work hard for you if you send me to Washington, D.C.
Thank you.
I would be privileged. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Corbett. Thank you so much. And that is it for all the questions tonight. And thank you so much for your participation. Candidates, please stick around for a few more minutes. But first of all, let's give all of the candidates a round of applause for their candid answers tonight.
Folks, if you did not hear enough specifics from these candidates, pin them down outside. Before we leave, I want to thank the volunteers. Most of the volunteers are still working professionals, and so we're doing this on our own time. So thank you to the volunteers. Also want to thank tonight's sponsors. City of Hayward Businesses Snappies provided the coffee outside, and also Sugar Bowl Bakery, which is a City of Hayward business, has provided the treats. Internship, see Priscilla back there. She has flyers for the internship dinner happening on Thursday. So make sure to pin her down and join Hayward Neighborhood Alert and APAPA. Thank you so much.